Hi everyone, and welcome back to another IBRACORP video. Thanks for tuning in today. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to everyone that's subscribed. If you're not a subscriber already, please subscribe. It really helps the channel out. As you can see, we're only just getting started, and if you enjoy our style, enjoy what we're doing here, please consider giving us a like and a subscription. We really appreciate it. So part of our MO is to just get stuck into it, so let's do that. Today we'll be talking about NGINX Proxy Manager. Now I had a user ask to do a getting started with tutorial, and I'm going to do that today in relation to installing it with Unraid. There are a lot of guides out there, but I'm hoping today that I'll be able to share something maybe new that you haven't learned before or you didn't know much about it. So what is NGINX Proxy Manager? NGINX Proxy Manager is a reverse proxy application used to get your internal traffic out to the external world, and it works similar to and basically built upon something like the Let's Encrypt container, HA proxy, or Trafic. For me personally, when I first began my home lab, the first thing I did was set up Let's Encrypt, and I was using that thanks to the tutorials from Space Invader 1 at the time on my Unraid server setup, and I found it quite useful. It did the job really well, did what I had to do with it, but I found after some time that doing a lot of tweaking and changing of the files and the configuration files really took up a lot of my time. You know, as soon as I installed an application, I would spend maybe just the same amount of time just fiddling with the code and the text documents in order to get the reverse proxy to pick up the service and expose it out to the World Wide Web. With NGINX Proxy Manager, I'd seen it a few times and it took me a while to finally make the decision to give it a try. And the first thing that stood out to me really was its user interface. I just love it. Some users say, you know, they don't feel like they get enough control with it, and that, you know, they still prefer doing things in a more hands-on background way. And that's perfectly fine. If that's for you, that's excellent. For my needs, I was quite happy with having it with a beautiful interface, but also with the exact features that I needed to get stuff exposed out quickly and easily. So we're on the homepage at the moment, nginxproxymanager.com. If we just have a quick look at what their features are, you can see that here it's got SSL built in thanks to Let's Encrypt. You can expose your private network web services and get connected anywhere. The UI is based on Tabler, which I can tell you, I mean, it looks really, really good. It looks good. Free SSL certificates, obviously there's no cost there. They also get renewed by themselves. It is available as a Docker image, and you can have multiple users access the interface. Further to that, you can set up what's known as access control lists, so that you can set access control and authentication up on the proxy level. Now, if you wanted to do this via Docker Compose or via Docker, you can follow their setup instructions here as well. And our friends over at Awesome Open Source also made a video about installing this using Docker outside of the Unraid operating system. So, you know, if you're trying to install it anywhere else, I recommend you go check out his channel. I'll put the link down in the description down below. So we're just going to leave it at that for now. And we really just want to get stuck into the install. We know why you're here. You want to get started with it. Let's do it. So first things first, we've got a brand new Unraid server here. It's clean. It's got nothing on it. I've set it up completely from scratch, basically, just to make these videos, and it just makes it easier for me to explain things as a new user might see it. Or if you're already an experienced user and you just wanted to see what it looked like from scratch. So here we are on our brand new server, Pumba. I'm not sure where I came up with that. I sort of just popped in my head, so not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, but here we are. So the first thing we're going to do is head over to the App Store, and thankfully NGINX Proxy Manager already has a template in there. And you can see there's various different options when you type in NGINX. Over here you'll see Authelia. Now this is actually my repository, and I created this template, and I'll be making a future video on how to create your own template and have it published so other people can use it. I'll also be able to show you how Authelia works in another video as well. So I'm going to be creating a video on how to set up and use Authelia, which is an authentication and authorization server. Really handy if you're trying to secure some of your links. So we've got NGINX Proxy Manager here. If you like, you can have a read through here. Come down to network type, IBRACORP. Now, if you aren't using your own custom Docker network, I recommend that you do. It just means that all your Docker containers are on a separate network within the Unraid system, and they can talk to each other, but then you can expose the IP out anyway. So if you scroll down a little bit further, what you can see here is the default ports that are set up. As usual, thanks to Docker, you can change these to whatever you think is relevant, but it's really important that you take note of what you're putting in here, because we're going to have to go into our router later and forward some ports across. So the first thing you'll see is the UI port, which is 7818. Now I'm happy with that. This is a brand new system, like I said, so I'm not too fussed about that. But if you are already using this port, feel free to change it to something else. Your HTTP port 1880 and HTTPS 18443. The configuration directory, so by default on Unraid systems, you want that in the app data folder, which is already written out for us there. Permissions, priority, and whether you want to enable or disable IPv6. I strongly recommend you don't change anything here, to be honest, unless you know what you're doing, or if you have a specific reason to change it. So we're actually quite happy with all that. So we really haven't had to change anything at this point. Keep in mind that when we first started up, these will be the login credentials that we'll need to log into it. We'll scroll down, hit apply, and it's finished. Hit done. We'll go back to Docker. You can see now the container is now running. We've got a started, and if we quickly check the logs, doing a couple of setup items, and we close the logs, and we'll come back and open the web UI. So there we go. So we've got the web UI going. So we'll put the default credentials in, which was this, and change me as the password. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to keep this as it is, but just remember that this is what you use to log into the application through the front end. So just remember that the email address you set will be used, same as your name. So we'll just click save. Oh, there you go. We have to change it anyway, so that's probably a good thing, hey? Hit save. We want to set a password, so I'll go ahead and set one now. Keep in mind that this top one is the default one, which was change me. And there you go. So, I mean, you can already see we've already started up and we're in the application. So it's taken us little to no effort really to get that started. So welcome to NGINX Proxy Manager. Now we'll get to installing and proxy forwarding something out, but I'll just take you through a quick walkthrough of the interface just so you can get a quick understanding of what everything is, because when I started, it did take a little bit of time to sort of get my head around things. Proxy host is probably going to be the most used, or definitely I would say be the most used part of this application for you, but you might find other needs to use these other ones here. So we'll start with proxy hosts, which is also accessible at the top, as you can see. Click on proxy hosts. This is where you'll put in basically the instructions that tells NGINX Proxy Manager where to send traffic through. So let's discuss how this process works really quickly. I created a quick image just to give you an example on what that looks like. So forgive me for the sort of basic image here, but you know, it gets the point across. So we don't want to overcomplicate it. It doesn't need to be. So let's say you own a domain, and the domain is called, in my case, IBRACORP.io. Now, if you are using your domain with your provider, you'll be able to set your DNS settings there. If you're using your domain and using DNS elsewhere, in which case I am, for example, with Cloudflare, you'll be creating a DNS entry here. DNS entry, you will create a CNAME or a record. I use CNAMEs in my case. Cloudflare already is configured to say IBRACORP.io is available at this IP address. Now this is a made up IP address, it's not mine. I then create a record or a C name, and I call that, for example, proxy.ibracorp.io. Cloudflare then says proxy.ibracorp.io, send it to this IP address, which will be your home internet connection, I would assume, if you're using it at home or business. On the router, we will have a port forwarding setting. That port forwarding will say port 80, send it to port 1880. Port 443, send it to 18443. Why did we pick these? Well, if you remember back in our installation here, these are the default ports that we've got configured. And if you read it, it says your router should be configured to forward port 80 to this port. If it doesn't allow the setting destination internal IP address, this must be set to 80. So if your router doesn't allow you to port forward, then you would have to set this manually to 80 and 443. In our case, ours does, so we're just going to continue with that. So, hi, I'm user blah blah blah, and I wanted to get to, I've typed in your website, wordpress.ibracorp.io. It's sent the request off, it's hit your router. The router says the traffic is on 80, which is HTTP traffic, or if it's HTTPS, which we'll get to later, 443. Forward that traffic on to NGINX Proxy Manager. So the first thing you'll notice is that NGINX Proxy Manager is the point of authority here. We are not telling the application to talk directly to the router and then out to the internet. Instead, NGINX Proxy Manager is the man in the middle, and it says, yes, pass to here, no, stay away, or redirect, or whatever the case might be. And because of that, you can have it as an internal application, but NGINX Proxy Manager will publish it out as an external address, in this case, wordpress.ibracorp.io. So at the NPM level, I will refer to this as NPM just to save some time. NPM then says, what address is this traffic coming from? It's coming from wordpress.ibracorp.io. Okay, I know I have a rule in here that says wordpress.ibracorp.io, send it to this IP address and this port. Simple as that. It really doesn't get any simpler than that, guys. So we have it installed, but we've got nothing in it. There's a couple more steps we need to do. The first step is we need to forward some ports. So log into your router, whatever that router might be, and I'm fairly sure that most routers these days allow you to forward a port. In my case, I'm using DDWRT firmware on my router. You might have a Netgear, which is running Netgear firmware. You might have D-Link, whatever the case might be. You will have a setting in there somewhere to forward ports. And if you look up online, I'm sure you'll find it very quickly. So in this case, I've gone to NAT quality of service, then to port forwarding if you're using DDWRT. And we have two rules in here. And we've said, I've named this NPM HTTPS and NPM HTTP. 443 and 80 respectively. Forward them to the IP address of our server that we're running NGINX Proxy Manager on. Change that port to 18443. So any traffic coming on 443, send it to 18443. Any traffic on 80, send it to 1880. That's it. So we've set up our port forwarding. We've started up NGINX Proxy Manager. What's next? Well, now you need to enter the DNS entry. So on my DNS, which I use, again, I use Cloudflare. Yours might be your domain provider's website, whatever that might be, GoDaddy, for example, or Google Domains if you're staying with Google Domains. So this will be your DNS section of that provider. So in here, you can see I've got a whole bunch of different CNAMEs, and they're basically subdomains of what I want to proxy out. In this case, we want one called proxy. So what do you do? Well, we would go type CNAME, name, proxy, and in my case, ibracorp.duckdns.org. Now I already have that address in here, so proxy. So that part is done. If I just bring up the image again. So now we've set up our DNS. We've set up the router to forward the ports. And we've also started up NGINX Proxy Manager. Pretty simple, right? So now the next step is getting an application out to the internet. Now in this case, you could install another application. If we were to just take this out and you wanted to get something running externally, you would install it normally. Let's say Overseer from here, for example. We've got the port number, we've got the config file, we know where it's all going to be saved, no problem. Click apply, start it up. And that's installed. Click done. Now if we go back, you can see we've got our new application installed and ready to go. We open up the web UI. It takes us to our main page. Fantastic, that's working. Highly recommended that you set it up completely. So I would, go in, click login with Plex, blah, blah, blah. Set it up so that you have your admin account created and that it's secure before you continue to the next step. Because this is just for this video, I'm not gonna bother with this. But let's say you finish configuring this application and you're like, you know what, now I'm ready to access this remotely. No problem. So let's come back to NGINX Proxy Manager, go into Proxy Hosts, add a proxy host, and put in the information that you want. Now, if I go back to my DNS, I believe I have one here for Overseer already. So let's say Overseer. Make sure you click on the item or hit tab, otherwise it won't validate. Put in the IP address of the server, then the port, in this case it's 5055. These are extra options that you have in NGINX Proxy Manager, so you can cache assets. So if it's something that loads static images or static content, it would probably save you a lot of bandwidth if you were to hit that. I use Cloudflare as well, so that I believe does a lot of caching anyway, but it doesn't hurt to turn it on if you think it's relevant for you. Obviously we want to block common exploits. I'm not going to allow WebSocket support, but sometimes you might want that. Certain applications need WebSockets to function correctly. And it's publicly accessible. So this is what I was talking about with access lists. We'll come back to that. Custom locations. If you are used to using something like Let's Encrypt to manage your NGINX configuration, you'll know that a lot of times you'll need a lot of custom content. This is where you would enter that information. So you can say at this path, and this is from Organizer. In Organizer, you need to add a couple of extra details, blah, blah, blah. And so that you can tell it where to go for authentication. In this case, we don't need anything extra, so we're just going to ignore that. Then we're going to head into SSL. This is the part that makes it really easy, right? Request a new SSL certificate. We're going to say force it. Using Cloudflare, I have HSTS enabled, so I'll just tick that as well. If you do not know, or if you don't use HSTS, leave it unchecked and then test and then come back. We're not going to bother with a DNS challenge, but you can turn it on if you like. It's going to ask you for an email address. So make sure you put one in there that you actually do check, because it will send you a reminder and say, you've got 30 days left on your SSL certificate, for example. Click I agree and just hit save. So now we'll wait. And that's it. And if we just click this link, there you go. That's it. So now this is accessible externally to anybody in the world. And that's how easy it is. Now, if you've used Let's Encrypt before, or had to use those files for NGINX, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The amount of time that it took to get something going. Okay, it wasn't major, but you could be spending that time elsewhere, maybe configuring the application itself, spending that time making sure that everything is working the way you want, instead of messing with this file. The other issue that I found is that if you have a simple mistake in there, that will throw off the entire setup that you've worked on. So you'll find that for some reason it won't work anymore. You'll be messing around with the application. By the time you realize that it's just one spelling mistake in the configuration of NGINX, You know, it could have saved you a lot of time, believe me. I've been there many, many times. So you've got your access lists, which I touched on earlier. And if I just click this icon here, access lists provide a blacklist or whitelist of specific client IP addresses along with authentication for the proxy hosts via basic HTTP auth. So if you have an application that doesn't have a login system built into it and it's completely exposed, you want to proxy that out, you know, this is something that you would implement. And NGINX Proxy Manager lets you lay that over the top. SSL certificates. Apart from Let's Encrypt, if you have your own certificates, you can also add them here as well. So I use mine, for example, from Cloudflare, which allows end-to-end encryption from me to Cloudflare and then Cloudflare out. Your users, as well as an audit log. So you can track everything that's happened, which is pretty cool in case you forget. If you click the view details, this is what's happening in the background. So this is the stuff that you would normally have to do manually if you're still using those files. Maybe perhaps not to this degree, because this might be specific to the actual application as well, but you know, a lot of that sort of work has been taken away and taken out. In the settings, you've got your congratulations page, 404 redirect, or a custom page. So you can put one in there when something hits the NGINX and doesn't have a host. A couple of other options there. Redirection host, so you can basically tell it to redirect traffic. Let you read that. Streams, and that really comes in handy for FTP and 404 hosts. So if you know that it's going to hit a page that is a 404, you can tell it to redirect to this or show this page instead. So that's NGINX Proxy Manager. I hope that was helpful. It's really easy to get started with it, which is why I love it, and I'm a big advocate of it. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. It really helps. You know the deal. And I hope to see you in the next video. Soon we'll be coming up with one for installing Ophelia. That'll be our next video. So we look forward to sharing that with you as well. Thank you, and see you next time.